Some words from Ruth chapter 1, beginning at verse 6. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who would grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." Did you notice in verse 6? Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. Naomi recognizes that God is in control, that God is sovereign, that his will is being worked out, even though she doesn't understand it. And maybe somewhere she recognizes that Israel has been disobedient and that the punishment that has come about as famine and death are being worked out because God is at work. And yet she thinks of her daughters-in-law. She wants them to find happiness. She wants them to find peace. She knows that in Jewish law, the wives could, if she had sons marry, could be found someone who would keep the line going through marriage, through more children for the daughters-in-law. But she knows it's not going to happen through her. And she wants them to have a chance to find family, to find peace, to find hope again. But at the very end of that passage that I read, verse 13, she says, "Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." She feels in her spirit that God is punishing her, that all this tragedy has come about, and whether she understands it or not, she recognizes that God has the right to inflict consequences on any of his subjects, on any people. And however bitter it is, she's willing to live within those consequences. Now, I have a question for you. How often, when you make a decision, when you're choosing an action, how often do you think about God's response? How often do you think about the consequences of your actions and how your decisions might affect God and his plans? Corona, as I've said, is giving us good illustrations. And right now, the news that's just finished is talking about how our decisions Our choosing whether or not to accept the guidelines, to abide by the guidelines, will have consequences not just for ourselves, but for other people. Naomi was living in the consequences and was still willing, however hard it might be, to acknowledge that God was in control. My challenge for you over the next few days, weeks, months, is to take stock, is to consider what are the decisions you need to make about your future, your family's future, your work future, your church future. And how will you go about making those decisions? More importantly, how will you consider the consequences, the spiritual consequences, the godly consequences in the decisions you're going to make? Now, I have known people that have got so caught up in this, it's almost like they ask God's permission for what cereal they're going to eat in the morning, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I do wonder, how often do I seek God in the real decisions I have to make about my life? How often do I really consult him? And when consequences appear, am I willing to look back and ask the question, is there something God is trying to get me to learn? Is there something I could have done differently that would have had different consequences? And am I willing to prayerfully analyse the decisions I make to ensure I put God's will into practice as often as possible? What decisions do you have to make today, this week, this month? How will you and God make those decisions together? See you tomorrow.